Hello and welcome back to Wine with Andy. I'm Andy. Today we're continuing our look at climate and the effects of climate on the flavours of wine. Last time we had a look at that using white wines, and today we're going to be doing the same thing but with red wines. So I've got two bottles of Merlot here next to me. One of them's from France and the other one's from Australia. You could have got one from South Africa instead if that's what you found in the shop. For more details on what the wines are that you need for this episode, please have a look in the description and there's a bit more information there. So we're looking at climate. You'll remember that last time we thought about the flavours in the wine, focusing on the fruit flavours and the ripeness of that. We're going to be doing exactly the same thing this time, except of course there's a bit more to red wine than white wine. There's two big things that you're going to notice that are different. One, it's got some colour. It's red, not white. And two, there's something called tannin, which we'll notice when we get to put it in our mouth. Both of these things actually come from the same place, the skin of the grape. You see, when you make a white wine, you squash the grapes and drain off the juice pretty quickly so that they don't get any extra flavour from the skins. When you make a red wine, you squash the grapes and then you let it all soak for a bit, and the colour is actually, normally, in the skin of the grape. So, red wine is normally made from grapes that have white flesh in the middle, so the juice itself is white, but the skins are dark. So if you let them soak, you get that colour leaching out of the skins and into the juice. The skins also hold these tannins that we'll talk about later. But enough of an intro, let's get to tasting. I'll pour these wines into my nice two glasses here that are exactly the same, just like last time, so that the only thing that's going to be different is the wine inside them. I'm going to pour the French wine here in my left-hand glass. And the Australian wine in my right-hand glass. I've overfilled a little bit there, but just like last time, we're filling it up to the widest point of the glass. That gives us the biggest possible surface area for those flavours to evaporate from. So, hopefully you'll remember that the first part of tasting is to have a look. Now, let's pick these up, tilt them against this nice light-coloured surface that I've got here, and have a look. Now, there's actually a little bit of a difference between the two wines that I've got here. The one on my right, the Australian one, is noticeably a little bit darker than the one on my left, the French wine. Now, it's possible that that could have something to do with the climate. I mentioned before about how the climate helps to ripen the grapes more fully. And colour's one of those things that really changes quite a lot with ripening and with ripeness. So it's possible that the darkness is because those grapes themselves were darker or more intensely coloured. But colour is actually something that you can control a little bit through winemaking choices, so that's a sort of a bit of a guess, really. Let's get on to sniffing. So, first sniff, just pick up the glass, get the nose in there and have a sniff. So, on the French one, I think it's sort of fairly generic, juicy, maybe dark red sort of fruit, maybe something like a plum. On the Australian one, similar sort of fruit. But then if I'm thinking about the ripeness, and remember we're thinking about the category of the fruit, so is it plum, strawberry, red fruit, berry, dark fruit? And then we're thinking about the ripeness separately, so from a scale of unripe green to overripe to jammy and cooked. Now, I'm already getting some more of those sort of cooked flavours. There's a kind of slight tarriness to the Australian wine here, like you get if your jam sticks to the bottom of the pan a little bit. Okay, second step. Let's get to swirl and sniff. Oops, it's tricky. Easier to do it on the table. So I've got much more of that juicy, fresh plum flavour coming through now. Similar sort of flavours. There's not too much development of flavour, there's not too much else that I'm smelling. It's mostly just that plum, a little bit of mint or something maybe, creeping in on the Australian one there. Now, let's put them in our mouths. A lot of juicy red fruit there. I'm thinking about the things that I've mentioned before that we can only detect in the mouth. No sugar to speak of, quite a sort of medium level of acid. I can feel a little bit of a tingle on my tongue there in the French one. And then the alcohol's not particularly prominent. There's quite a long finish to it though. I'm still getting some of that fruit flavour even now. Now I mentioned at the start, tannin. This is that sort of astringent, drying out thing in red wine. And I'm sure everyone has experienced tannin if you've ever bitten into an unripe banana. It's that kind of sort of effect on you, all dried out like you've got a mouthful of flour or something. And the way we feel tannin in red wine when we're tasting it is really on the inside of our lips. So I didn't really swirl it around that sort of area this time. So take another sip and make sure to swirl the red wine between your teeth and your lips, and you'll really feel it on the inside of your lips. Also remember to make those silly faces and suck the air through, make silly noises as well to get all the flavour you can out of it. Now, tannin has sort of that drying power. It has a sort of a strength of tannin to think about. So this is a kind of a medium strength tannin. It's not completely drying my mouth out, but at the same time, it's not completely smooth. It's there, it's obvious. But it also has a texture, so you might find in different wines that the tannins feel kind of like sand on the inside of your mouth, or like flour, or really smooth. This one is very smooth, and that's actually characteristic of the grapes normally. So the kind of tannins we normally get in Merlot are quite smooth. Let's move on to the Australian. So, just like before, I've got more of those bigger, bolder flavours, the kind of slightly jammy. It's like kind of like plum jam actually. There's a little bit of something cocoa-y, chocolatey maybe almost there as well. I'm not thinking about the tannins. It's the same texture, which I'd expect. It's the same grape, so similar sort of texture there. But it's noticeably more powerful on the tannins in the Australian wine. So last time I showed you some charts of climate data for the two wines I had in front of me. Let's have a look at that again for these two very quickly. So this is where these two wines are from. The one from France is kind of from the western edge, western coast of France, about halfway down, and the one from Australia is from the south of Australia. Now let's have a look at the temperature, the average monthly temperatures in those two places. And just like before, I've sort of artificially lined up the seasons in these two places so that we can compare them a bit more easily. You can see that the Australian wine region is hotter and has a longer growing season, more critically, than the French one. So that gives it that bit more time to ripen and develop those jammier, more cooked flavours, and those extra sort of grippy tannins. Let's have a look again at the sunshine in the two places. So this chart shows the levels of sunshine in the two places. And you can see that, just like with the previous comparison, the Australian one gets more sun than the French one. And that also contributes to the ripening. Specifically, like I said before, the UV light. And of course, Australia is famous for having lots of UV light thanks to the hole in the ozone layer. Now, it's probably worth talking a little bit about what tannins are useful for. A lot of the time when we drink wine, we're drinking it with food. Now, the reason I can feel tannins inside my mouth is because the tannin molecules are chemically reacting with the protein in the lining of my mouth, the skin inside my mouth. And we also eat protein, of course. Meat is mostly protein. And of course, you will know that red wine is traditionally associated with eating meat. You'll have a steak and a red wine. You won't have a steak and a white wine. And the reason for that is that red wine, the tannins in red wine, can help tenderize that meat by reacting with the protein in it. So it makes a good match. It helps you digest it, actually. But that's enough waffling from me. We haven't done the final and vital step of wine tasting, which is to think about it. So let's go back, have another sniff, another taste, and let's have a think about which of these we prefer and why. Now for me, that's quite a difficult choice. I quite like them both. I think they have different strengths, and the more intense flavours in the Australian one would probably match with a more intensely flavoured sort of food. But I can see a place for both of them. What do you think? Do you prefer the slightly lighter, fruitier flavours of the French one? Or do you prefer the jammier, more cooked flavours in the Australian or the South African, if you've gone South African? And just like last time, you can remember that and use it next time you're standing in the supermarket wondering what to buy. You can use it in the restaurant, in the pub, if you're comparing. If you want a lighter, less rich and jammy wine, perhaps go with the French one. If you want something a bit heavier, a bit richer to go with your meal, then perhaps go with the one from the hotter place. So that about covers the wines for today. I hope you'll continue enjoying them. But let's move on to talk about what you'll need for next time. So next time we're going to be moving on to start looking at some of the fundamental building blocks of wine flavour. And the first one we're going to be doing is sugar. So all of the wines we've tasted so far have been dry wines, which means they've not had any residual sugar that's left over after fermentation in them. So I want you to get a pair of Rieslings. One of them should be off-dry. I'd like you to find a German off-dry Riesling, and the other one should be dry. And that could come from Austria, Germany, or France. I've got one from the Alsace wine region of France. Now you will need to check the labels to make sure that they are dry and off-dry. And the way you can be doubly sure is to check the alcohol levels, because fermentation turns the sugar into alcohol. So more sugar in the final wine means less alcohol. So if your wine, like this German Riesling, has an alcohol level of less than, say, 10-11%, this one is 8.5%, it's going to be off-dry. And if it's higher than that, this French one is 12%, it's going to be dry. So that just gives you that added level of assurance that you've bought what you need. I hope you've enjoyed trying the Merlots with me, and I'll look forward to seeing you next time for some sugar. Cheers!